Today, I'm going to recommend to you a book series, 5 books that will make you the most interesting person in the room. Now, first, a disclaimer. The guy that wrote this, complete dick. And he prides himself on this. He would not be surprised to hear me say that. He has a very big Twitter following. I follow him on there. I love him as a writer. I love him as a thinker on certain topics, but his delivery, his means of communicating, on Twitter at least, he's a dick. He's not doesn't seem like a great human, but his ideas will make you a more interesting person. And the reason they will make you more interesting is because each one of these books, there's 5 books in this series. Each one of these books will challenge your worldview, will challenge the paradigms in which you currently operate. I know that they did for me, and I've revisited these books. This is actually my favorite book series of all time. These 5 books, in conjunction with one another, is my favorite. They're fantastic. They're so good. Each one opens my eyes, expands my horizons, my perspectives, and challenges the way that I think about the world. So I'm going to break down each one of these books. I'm going to share with you an idea from each one of these books that if you dive into and you really understand these concepts, you're going to be able to go to dinner parties. You're going to be able to go on first dates. You're going to be able to hang out with random people at conferences. And you're going to have no shortage of things to talk about because you're going to have thought very deeply about these concepts that most of us have never stopped to reflect on. And that's the thing that's really crazy about these books is each one, I read them and I'm like, I consider myself to be a really well-considered person. I spend a lot of time writing and thinking about my thoughts. And so many of these were just completely out of left field and made me go, oh, that is true. I never thought that. It's wild. So you can be that person at the party. So the book series is, can you read that? That's Incerto by Nassim Nicholas Taleb. Taleb is the man. So there's 5 books in this series that make up the Incerto. There is Antifragile. There is The Bed of Procrustes. There is Skin in the Game, Black Swan, and Fooled by Randomness. So let me put these down because they're heavy. Those are heavy. Let's talk about them. Book number 1 is probably his most famous book. It's called Black Swan. This is the book that put him onto the world's map back in, I don't know, early mid-2000s, maybe right after the financial crash. I think it was right after the great financial crash. The Black Swan is a very simple premise. It's simply this, is that the world is affected most dramatically by these events that nobody, by their definition of them being a black swan, can predict. The idea is very simple. If every human had only ever experienced white swans, you lived in a part of the world in Europe where all you ever saw were white swans, you would make the connection that white swans, a swan is just white, right? But as soon as you traveled to a new country and you saw for the very first time a black swan, it would change the entire paradigm that humanity had been operating up into that moment. You could not possibly have known that swans could be black because every swan that had ever been observed in human history up to that point was white. So now you have a black swan. It's a black swan event. Nobody could have predicted it. You could not have known because why would you have ever even thought there'd be a black swan? But now that you see a black swan, you have to admit that not all swans are white. That, in fact, you are operating under a completely false pretense. And there are so many of these events, things that up to that moment, nobody could have predicted it was going to happen in that way. 9/11. No idea that it was going to happen. Nobody knew. Well, I mean, the people that were perpetrating it perhaps knew. But up to that moment, the markets could not have baked that in. Nobody could have predicted that was going to happen, right? Same with the great financial crisis. You could say, oh, some people did, right? They knew this thing, right? But they didn't. Because if they did, it wouldn't have happened. And that's a really interesting thing about black swans is by knowing that they're going to happen or by having a prediction that they're going to happen, it no longer is a black swan event. Anyway, human history, his whole take in this book, and it's a very interesting one, is that history is defined by these black swan moments more than anything else that occurs in the interim. And so he proposes this idea that as an investor, you need to make barbell investments. This barbell investment strategy is understanding the asymmetric risk-reward ratio, where you make an investment that has a fixed downside, but potentially unlimited upside. So that's the very first idea from Black Swan. I'm not going to go any deeper into it right now because you just need to read the book. Book number 2 is Fooled by Randomness. Fooled by Randomness is a fantastic mind screw because the human brain is really good at taking dots, taking events, and then connecting them to create a cohesive narrative. That is what your brain does. It is a story generating machine. It creates explanations for why things happened. And the reason your brain does that is because there's power in your ability to predict accurately what's going to happen next. And if we can look to the past and say, oh, when I ate those berries, it gave me the shits, therefore I shouldn't eat those berries in the future, right? There's predictive power in that helps you survive. So that's what the human brain is designed to do. But here's the problem. Is the world is far more chaotic and random than your brain is capable of understanding. And so what ends up happening is things happen that we ascribe meaning to. We ascribe cause and effect to, when in reality, they had nothing to do with one another. Nothing to do with one another. And more problematic on top of this is that when events occur, we then assume the likelihood of that event occurring was far greater than it was perhaps in reality. Right? Of course, World War II was likely to happen. You can go and look at all the things that led up to this. Of course, that girl breaking your heart when you were 16 years old. Of course, that was the most likely outcome, right? Of course, getting hit by that car on the sidewalk was the most likely thing to happen. Our brain, when things happen, our brain just goes, yes, that was the most likely thing to occur. We don't think of our life as the byproduct of these random low probability events. You don't think about your day. Today, you woke up and you went through your life and you have thought to yourself, yes, I woke up. That was the most probable outcome. Was it? Was it really the most probable outcome? You sitting here listening to this podcast, of course, that was the most probable outcome. I got into my car and I always listen to this podcast when I'm driving to work, and I appreciate you for doing that. You guys rock. But was it really the most probable outcome when you take into consideration all of the things that could have happened before that moment? You could have had a heart attack. You could have slipped down the stairs and broken your neck. You could have gotten mugged before you got to the car. The car might not have started, right? All of these things might have been more likely to occur, and you might actually be living the fringe case, the low probability event. But you take it for granted that it was the most likely outcome. That's a mind trip of an idea. And the consequences of that permeate everything. And so go read that book, Fooled by Randomness. Third, skin in the game. Skin in the game is a cool concept. Maybe doesn't really warrant the book as thick as that book is. It's simply this, is that people should not have power and control over outcomes unless they have skin in the game. That if you do not have skin in the game, if there's not a consequence to being right or to being wrong, that this perverts incentives. And as Charlie Munger said, if you show me the incentives, I'll show you the outcome. So for instance, a great example of this is economists that make all sorts of wild claims on NBC or MSNBC, right? And they're wrong 90% of the time, but there's no downside consequence to this. Now, if they go on the show and instead they have to make a prediction, and based off of that prediction, we're then going to put them against a wall to the firing squad, they're going to make a very different prediction, right? They're not going to make these drastic, unsubstantiated claims. They're going to hedge their bets. And those bets will likely be more consistent with reality. They're going to put a lot more time and energy into what they say if their ass is on the line. And this is why private businesses are typically the most market efficient, is because the owner, the founder, the entrepreneur, the person at the top of the chain, their ass is on the line. And so when they get it wrong, they got to pay the consequences. But for our politicians, who there's really no downside consequence to them being wrong and sending our boys off to war, right? Like at the end of the day, they get voted out of office. Very different consequence than if they had to go fight the war themselves. So they don't have the skin in the game that the people who have to go live out the consequences of those actions have to deal with. And that when there's a disparity between the person making the decision and the person who has to pay the price, that's a problem. So, skin in the game, book number 3. Book number 4, very, very, very quick, is Bed of Procrustes. This is just a book of aphorisms. This is like Nassim's Twitter, pretty much, all distilled. I love aphorisms. I think they're very interesting, hooky ways to remember deep, provocative insights. And so this book, Bed of Procrustes, is very, very good for flip it open to a random page, read a line, and then think deeply on it. Like there's 2 sentences written in a witty, kind of pithy way. I love pithy statements. really gets the juices going. So like that book quite a lot. Fifth book, fifth and final book. This is my favorite book that Taleb has written. It's called Antifragile. I'm not going to tell you anything about Antifragile. Up to this point, if you've been listening to this podcast this long, and I've shared with you Black Swan, Fooled by Randomness, the ideas and skin in the game, you can see how these books can make you a very interesting person in a conversation at a party, on a stage, right? These will give you so many different paradigms to talk about concepts. I'm telling you, Antifragile is the most powerful of them all. So I'm not going to tell you anything about it because I want you to go buy it. I want you to go read it. And I'm not going to give you a link or anything like that because I don't want to get paid for this. I just want you to go read it because it can transform your life and it will make you the most interesting person in the room. So go pick up these books. Do it today. I can't tell you how much I love this series. And that's going to do it for me, guys and gals. I'll see you in the next episode.